We'll now talk about what problems you can experience and what area that they're related to. The pressure regulator controls the pressure in your air chamber. The pressure in your air chamber controls your velocity. So anything that has to do with velocity has to do with the pressure regulator. It can only be in one of two areas. It can either be in that regulator seal or in your regulator piston being stuck. Those are the only two areas you should look in if you're having a problem with velocity. The next area we go to is the on-off valve. The on-off valve divides the gun in half. When you pull the trigger, it shuts off the flow to the front of the gun. So first of all, if you have a leak in the gun, first thing to do is fire the gun and hold the trigger on. This will divide the gun in half. That's an important concept. Now, if you're leaking down the barrel and you fire the trigger and hold the trigger on, it continues to leak down the barrel, you have not divided the gun in half. That means there's a problem with your on-off valve. If you hold that trigger on and it stops leaking, that means your leak is somewhere forward of the on-off valve. So that either means it was in the bottom part of the on-off valve or in the power tube. Anything associated with leaking down the barrel is associated with the power tube. And likely, it's that little O-ring in the power tube, that power tube O-ring that we told you about. So, leaking down the barrel, power tube. On-off valve divides the gun in half. You can learn a lot by holding that trigger on. If it stops leaking, it's somewhere in the front. If it continues leaking, it's somewhere in the back. Anything that has to do with the velocity is your pressure regulator. And those are the three areas that you go to if you have problems. The on-off valve also has another characteristic that if you fire the gun and hold the trigger on, you'll get what we call a lawn sprinkler if you have a bad Teflon O-ring. The gun will go like a lawn sprinkler and only occasionally leak air. When that happens, you need to replace the little white Teflon O-ring that's down in the bottom of your on-off valve. So let's remember that. Lawn sprinkler. That only means one thing. Teflon O-ring. Pressure regulator. Velocity, what do we look at? We clean. Regulator piston. And we clean or replace the regulator seal. Those are the important points to remember. So those are your three major sections of the guns and the problems associated with each one. The first thing we'll do is we'll check this gun for problems. Tank on, gas up, everything's fine, fire's fine. First step in checking a gun. Pull the trigger, hold it on. There is a problem. This is the lawn sprinkler. This is what we were telling you about, the problem with the on-off valve. We're holding the trigger on, but it's continuing to leak down the barrel. Lawn sprinkler. Teflon O-ring. Divides the gun in half. If the on-off valve is working correctly, there should be nothing leaking out the end of this gun, no matter what. So we'll go through and run a quick fix on it. Degas the gun fully before you ever take the valve body out. Strip your valve, pull out the on-off, bottom and pin, take out the brass, and in this case the Teflon O-ring came out by itself, so we'll put that aside. We'll go to our trusty Automag parts kit that has all of the rubber parts and rubber seals that are necessary to fix the gun. It has one of every rubber part that goes in the gun. Again, I'll use my favorite method of putting this together. I'll put the Teflon on the pin. It's a new Teflon. It goes on a little snug. It's fine. Check to make sure it doesn't fall off. Pull out my valve body, hook it back in. Fire's okay. Hold the trigger on. Everything's fine. Problem number 2, hold the trigger on. Leaking out the back of the gun. What could the problem be? Fire the gun is hot. We go back to our chart. We know we had a hot shot, had to do with velocity. Another thing we should add to this list is leaking out the back. Whenever it leaks out the back, that has to do with the pressure regulator. Take the gun apart and take a look and see what's wrong with this one. In this case, somebody forgot to put the regulator seal back in. Now, we did this for demonstration purposes, but you can see what would happen if your regulator seal were to be left out, or if it were to get a piece of dirt or something clogged into it. You would see air leaking out the back. So let's put our regulator seal back in. Tight end in first. No more leaks. Everything's fine now. Now we'll see what type of problem this gun has for us. Gas up, hold the trigger on, release the trigger, hold the trigger on, no leak, let the trigger off, definitely barrel leak. On-off valve working correctly, leak down the barrel. Leaking down the barrel is always associated with power tube. Degas the gun. Remove the bolt. Take off the power tube tip. Take off the spring. Field trip screw is a good way to get these things out of here. Power tube O-ring from our handy parts kit. The spring in. The bolt on. And put it back together. Trigger on. All fixed. Next, we're going to come up with a gun that has what we call classic bolt stick. Bolt stick can happen when you're either rapid firing or when you get a drooping shot or you double ball feed. This gun is a severe example of it. Now the bolt's locked up. The only way to reset the bolt is to go in and push something against it. Watch the trigger click out. This happens under rapid fire conditions in extreme cases. The bolt stick can be a combination of bolt spring or power tube spring. The thing we want you to remember is that if you've got a bolt that's sticking, it's a spring, not an O-ring. It's in the power tube, either the spring or the bolt. Ready? Action.